It seems like mental health is everywhere these days.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
But has it always been this way?
That's a good question.
Today, we're going to go deep on how different generations view mental well-being,
Okay.
especially Gen X and Gen Z,
Interesting.
our understanding of mental health.
It's really fascinating how it's shaped by how we grew up.
Yeah, it's not just about, like, the words we use.
Right. It's way more than that.
It's a completely different mindset.
Totally.
And that's what we're looking at today.
Okay, cool.
With this research called Bridging the Generational Gap, Mental Health Awareness in Gen X and Gen Z, and the Stigmas in the Black Community.
Okay.
So we'll be exploring the cultural and generational sides of mental health,
Interesting.
particularly for the Black community.
Okay.
So this deep dive,
Yeah.
it's for everyone,
Cool.
no matter your generation.
Okay.
We're going way beyond just these like broad stereotypes
Right.
to really try to understand why these differences exist.
It's like we're peeling back those layers
Exactly.
of history
Yeah.
and lived experience.
To figure out how we even got here.
Makes sense.
So let's start with Gen X.
Okay.
Born roughly between the early 60s and the early 80s.
All right.
The research shows their childhood was one where mental health was like never discussed.
Wow, so it's almost taboo.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not just not talking about it,
Right.
but people were really trying to stop those conversations from happening.
Wow, okay.
Mental health struggles were seen as a weakness,
Hmm.
like something to hide away.
Interesting.
And the research says this led to a lot of Gen Xers feeling isolated and uncomfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like they weren't even okay with thinking about their own mental health needs.
Wow.
Now fast forward to Gen Z.
Okay.
They were born from the mid-90s to the early 2010s.
All right.
They seem to have a totally different relationship with mental health.
It's like completely opposite.
It's a huge shift.
Yeah.
This generation is way more open about mental health,
Interesting.
and they're not afraid to talk about it. Yeah, like anywhere.
Online,
Yeah.
offline, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
There's this whole therapy talk trend on TikTok.
I've heard of that.
Young people are sharing their therapy experiences, making it more normal to ask for help,
Okay,
breaking down that stigma.
makes sense.
So social media,
Yeah,
it obviously has its bad sides.
right.
But it seems like it's done a lot to normalize mental health for Gen Z.
It has.
It's a tool for connection,
yeah,
support, even activism.
totally.
Like even something as simple as the hashtag mental health matters.
Right.
It's not just spreading awareness.
Yeah.
It's about creating this whole community.
A community online.
Yeah, where
Yeah.
people feel seen,
Yeah.
understood.
Makes sense.
So it pushes back on that whole tough it out idea,
Yeah, I see that.
which was big with older generations.
Especially when times were tough.
Like, think about Gen X growing up with all those recessions and uncertainty.
Right. They had to figure things out on their own. Yeah. And those economic downturns probably made them feel like they had to be super self-reliant.
Right, they couldn't rely on anyone else.
They had to push through without any help.
That's so different from Gen Z.
Right. They're growing up with all this technology
Yeah.
and way more open talk about mental health.
Yeah, it's a totally different world.
So it makes sense they're more progressive.
For sure.
We're not saying one generation's better,
Of course not.
but their experiences have shaped how they see the world.
Totally.
And there are differences even within those generations.
Oh, right.
The research goes into the stigmas that the Black community faces.
Yeah.
And that adds another whole layer of complexity.
Oh.
Like the research says there's this pressure in the Black community.
To be mentally tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To keep going despite everything.
Right.
It's like being vulnerable is a weakness.
Interesting.
And you have to remember
What's that?
resilience is a strength,
Yeah, of course.
especially given all the racism.
Absolutely.
And the research points out
Yeah,
that this history can lead to distrust in institutions,
that makes sense.
including mental health support.
Right.
And that's a huge point.
Totally agree.
It's not just about having access to services.
Right.
It's about feeling safe using them,
Yeah,
feeling understood.
definitely.
And the research talks about culturally competent care,
Uh-huh.
which is so important.
But it's often missing.
Yeah, imagine a therapist who doesn't get the Black community's culture,
Right.
the pressure to code switch,
Yeah.
or the impact of all those microaggressions.
That would be a huge barrier to getting help.
Exactly.
So they might rely on their own networks instead.
Yeah, like family faith communities,
Uh-huh.
their cultural practices.
That makes sense.
But even with all that,
Yeah.
the research shows things are changing in the Black community.
Oh, really?
There's this growing movement for mental health awareness,
Wow, that's good.
pushing back against those old stigmas. And
Yeah.
that's where Gen Z comes in. They're not just talking.
Right.
They're actively trying to change things.
Wow, I love that.
They're using their digital skills to dismantle those stigmas,
Uh-huh.
creating space for more honest conversations.
That's great.
Like the #YouGoodman challenge on TikTok.
I saw that one.
It encouraged Black men to open up about their mental health.
It was really powerful.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how Gen Z uses social media.
To break down those walls.
Exactly.
And it's not just about sharing their own stories.
Right. It's more than that.
It's about helping people understand each other
Yeah.
and giving them resources.
Yeah.
Building a community online.
It's amazing.
Totally.
But let's be real.
Yeah.
Could all this openness online lead to oversharing?
That's true.
Or even people diagnosing themselves?
That could.
Like, it's great to be open,
Yeah.
but online platforms shouldn't replace real help.
Definitely not.
We have to make sure young people can get good information.
And find qualified professionals.
Exactly.
Right.
So that brings up a question for our listeners.
Okay.
How do you think technology is changing how we see mental health?
That is a good question.
Is it a good thing?
Right.
Or are there downsides we need to watch out for?
Right.
Something to think about as we keep talking about this.
It is.
And that's exactly what we're going to do after the break.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Welcome back to our deep dive
it's great to be back.
into mental health across generations.
In part one,
Yeah.
we talked about all those big generational and cultural differences,
Right, like how we even think about mental health.
like how we approach it.
It seems like the historical and cultural stuff really shapes that.
Totally. It's not just about like personal stuff.
Yeah, it's about those bigger societal things.
Like how Gen X grew up in this culture of silence,
Yeah.
while Gen Z is super open,
Yeah,
using social media to connect and advocate.
totally.
And we can't forget about the Black community,
Right.
the stigmas they face.
They have this whole extra layer of challenges.
Exactly. So for
Right.
part two,
Okay. I was thinking we could go deeper into the specific challenges
makes sense.
and opportunities for each generation.
Okay.
Like, let's start with Gen X.
Right.
The generation that was always told to just suck it up.
Yeah, deal with things internally.
Yeah, the whole stiff upper lip thing.
Strength and resilience.
Above all else.
And while those are good qualities,
Yeah, of course.
they can also stop people from getting help.
It's like they were trained to just power through.
Yeah, even when they were struggling.
Do you think that's why the research says Gen Xers are more likely to burn out?
I think it's connected.
Bit stressed out,
Yeah.
get sick from stress,
Uh-huh.
or even turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms.
It makes sense if you never learned how to process your emotions.
Yeah, or ask for support.
Those feelings have to go somewhere.
The research even says Gen X might not even recognize when they're struggling.
That's a good point.
So how do we reach them?
That's a good question.
Encourage them to actually care for their mental well-being, especially since they've spent so long ignoring it.
Exactly.
I think we need a bunch of different approaches. First, we got to meet them where they are.
What does that mean?
The research suggests they like traditional stuff.
Like what?
In-person therapy,
Okay.
support groups.
Yeah,
So emphasizing that human connection.
I see. So it's about building trust.
Yeah, rapport.
That face-to-face interaction.
Right. They might feel more comfortable with
But
that.
even reframe therapy
Oh, that's a good idea.
as like self-improvement
Yeah.
or personal growth.
Not just something you do when you're broken.
Take away that stigma.
Make it more approachable.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about Gen Z.
Okay.
Different challenges.
Completely. They're growing up in a world that's always connected,
Always on.
always demanding,
The pressure to achieve is huge.
and they have to look perfect online.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Plus all the information they're exposed to.
Constant news. Often negative.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. The research even talked about the rise in anxiety, depression, body image issues.
All that,
It seems like social media plays a role.
even though it connects people.
Right, it's like a double-edged sword.
Can we even find a balance?
That's the question.
It's about teaching them to think critically.
About what they see online.
Yeah, having media literacy skills,
The research even suggested taking breaks from social media.
like digital detoxes.
Yeah, just disconnecting for a bit.
That could be so good.
Creating space to just think and care for yourself.
Away from all that noise.
What about the kids who are already struggling, though?
Good point.
What can they do?
Well, Gen Z has really embraced online platforms and apps,
Right?
and those could be great for support.
Oh.
Connecting with mental health professionals,
Like what?
telehealth services,
Okay.
mental health apps, online support groups.
Yeah, a lot of young people use those.
But are there downsides to relying on tech for mental health?
That's a good point.
We have to make sure they're getting accurate information.
Yeah.
and actually connecting with real professionals.
Right. Online resources are great.
Yeah, to start.
But they shouldn't replace in-person help.
Not if you really need it.
It's about balance.
Exactly.
Using tech to help you.
Not replace human connection.
Now, we've talked about Gen X,
Yeah.
Gen Z, but what about the Black community?
Right. They have these unique challenges.
The research really showed how history and society create this system that's not built for them.
Doesn't feel safe.
The research says mental health issues are often seen as weakness in the Black community,
Like a lack of faith.
leading to silence and shame.
And then you add the lack of culturally competent care.
It's like a perfect storm of barriers.
Imagine needing help,
Yeah.
but the therapist doesn't understand your experience,
Your history.
the pressure you face.
It's a huge problem.
Culturally competent care is essential.
It's not just a bonus.
It's about creating that safe space.
So people can heal.
We need therapists who get it.
Yeah. Who understand systemic racism
Racial trauma.
and can validate those experiences.
Without judging.
So how do we make the mental health system work for everyone?
Including the Black community.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things.
Like what?
We need more Black therapists.
Okay.
More Black mental health professionals.
So diversifying the workforce.
Exactly.
Okay.
And training for all therapists,
Mhm.
no matter their background.
To be culturally sensitive.
And we need to fight for policies that make things more affordable.
Remove those barriers.
Yeah.
What about the stigmas within the Black community itself?
How do we break those down?
Yeah, how do we make it okay to talk about mental health?
That's where community groups come in.
Okay.
Grassroots organizations
They can provide resources.
that are culturally relevant.
Create safe spaces.
Empower people to advocate for themselves.
Building trust from within.
Using language that feels familiar.
Making mental health care feel accessible.
The research even talked about faith communities.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of churches are talking about mental health.
That's great.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Yeah, using institutions they trust.
To spread a message of hope.
So we've covered Gen X,
Yeah.
Gen Z, the Black community.
What about conversations between generations?
Oh, yeah, intergenerational dialogue.
The research says that's key.
Bridging that gap.
Through honest conversation.
But those conversations can be tough
They can be.
when everyone has such different perspectives.
Right.
The research even suggested making a family mental health contract
I like that idea.
where everyone agrees to talk openly.
Even if they disagree.
Do you think that would work?
I think it could.
It sets some ground rules.
Yeah. Creates a safe space.
It's recognizing that mental health affects the whole family.
Everyone needs to support each other.
Building those bridges of understanding.
We're all on this journey together.
Exactly. And that leads perfectly into my next question. How can we as listeners be more proactive
Yeah.
in bridging this generational gap?
How do we start?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
It's good to be back.
We've been exploring this amazing world of mental health.
Yeah, looking at it across generations.
We've learned so much about how history,
Culture
even tech,
shapes how we think about well-being.
like how Gen X was told to just tough it out,
And Gen Z is so open on social media.
and all the challenges for the Black community.
It's been a lot.
And we've all agreed open dialogue is key.
It is to bridge all those divides.
Like, we got to go beyond just talking.
Right. We need action.
That's what I was hoping we could focus on.
For this last part,
What can we actually do?
to support mental health across all generations.
It can feel overwhelming.
You can.
Like, where do we even start?
We all have a role to play.
Okay.
It's not just on therapists or policymakers.
Right, it starts with us.
Our actions.
Like, what kind of actions?
Sometimes the best thing is just listening
Really?
when someone is struggling. Yeah. Just listening can make a huge difference.
No judgment.
No, just empathy.
So just be there.
Put your phone away.
Uh-huh.
Make eye contact.
Okay.
Really hear them.
Let them know they're not alone.
Exactly.
You care.
It sounds simple,
It does.
but a lot of us struggle with it.
We interrupt.
Yeah.
We try to fix things,
It takes practice.
to just listen.
It does.
But it's so important.
Just feeling heard can be so powerful.
What about when listening isn't enough?
When they need more,
Yeah.
then think about practical ways to help. Offer to do chores.
If they're overwhelmed.
Cook a meal.
Yeah.
Babysit.
Okay.
Drive them to the doctor.
Little thing.
Little acts of kindness.
Make a big difference.
Sometimes you have to encourage them to get professional help.
That can be tough.
It can.
Especially if they don't want to.
Approach it with compassion.
Okay.
Don't force them.
Yeah.
but encourage them to think about it.
Okay.
Give them resources.
Yeah.
Help them find a therapist.
Let them know you're there.
Every step of the way.
Maybe sharing our own experiences could help.
That's a great point.
Like the research talked about storytelling.
It's powerful.
When we share our stories.
It helps others feel less alone.
More willing to open up.
It breaks down the shame.
The secrecy.
It's like saying, hey, it's okay to not be okay.
We've all been there.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to be a big dramatic story.
Right.
Just something small.
Maybe you've been stressed.
Yeah.
And meditation helped.
Just make mental health normal.
Part of everyday conversation.
Not something we whisper about.
That leads to more understanding.
More empathy.
But sometimes it takes more than just talking.
Like systemic change.
We need better policies.
More funding.
Make sure mental health care is affordable.
Accessible for everyone.
Support research.
Yeah.
Make mental health a priority.
In schools.
Workplaces.
Everywhere.
How do we do that?
Yeah. How do we go beyond individual actions?
Start by contacting your representatives. Tell them mental health matters.
Support organizations working on this.
Vote for candidates who care.
Make our voices heard.
Hold our leaders accountable.
We can't just wait for someone else to fix it.
We all have to do our part.
So as we wrap up,
Yeah.
I'm left with a lot of hope.
Me too.
But also urgency.
We've seen how much we can do.
Open dialogue.
Individual actions.
Systemic change.
It all creates a ripple effect.
Leading to more understanding.
More support.
A world where everyone can thrive.
It's a journey.
Not a destination.
But we learn and grow.
Support each other.
Every step of the way.
And that's the end of our deep dive.
Thank you for joining us.
We explored so much.
Remember, you're not alone.
Reach out.
Connect.
Keep talking.
Take care of yourselves.
And each other.